Hello and welcome to the Broken Rail's 1163rd New Social Environment. I'm Min, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Saya Woofalk and Eleanor Heartney. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Saya Woofalk draws from her African American, European, and Japanese heritage in making her work, alluding to science fiction, feminist theory, mythology, anthropology, archaeology, Eastern religion, and fashion. She reimagines a utopian, empathic world through a wide range of mediums. Woolfalk has exhibited in solo and group shows at museums and galleries internationally. Eleanor Heartney has been writing about art since 1981. She is a longtime contributor to Art in America, contributing editor to Art Press, editor-at-large for The Broken Rail, and has written extensively on contemporary art issues for Art News, ArtNet, Art in Auction, The Washington Post, and The New York Times. Her most recent book is the co-authored Mothers of Invention, The Feminist Roots of Contemporary Art. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eleanor to get us started.
Okay, thank you very much, Min. So today, this is kind of very exciting for me because this conversation is also connected to a special project that I just completed for the Rail, one of the guest critic sections, which I organized around the theme of the return of the goddess, the kind of the goddess idea, which was very prevalent in the 70s and early 80s, and then kind of disappeared from discourse, but has, I think, really come back with great force because so many of the issues that the artists who initially were involved and sort of younger artists who are interested now in this notion of the goddess are so relevant. And the goddess, as I construed it here, is not so much a personage as it is a kind of shift in values towards collectivity, nature, towards really a different way of and I think a more healthy way of dealing with our place in the world. And in the course of putting together the section, one of the people that I was very happy to be able to involve was Saya, who has a show up right now at Susan Inglett, which is a kind of teaser for a very big show that she's going to have at the Museum of Art and Design in April. And that work is going to be a 2-floor. She's going to take over 2 floors of the museum and basically recreate or create a kind of immersive environment in which she walks us through her empathic universe. And this is her big kind of world building project. And one of the reasons I wanted to have her in the goddess section was because it's a kind of speculative and yet in many ways very contemporary, dealing with contemporary issues, kind of world that it's a world building project, which is based on a kind of matriarchal world imbued with these kind of feminist spiritual energies. So I thought that we'd start, what we'll do today is talk a little bit about what the empathic universe is, and then kind of walk through some of the installations that'll be recreated at the Museum of Art and Design. And in the process, of course, talking about some of the big issues that this work is very much about. So, Saya, thank you so much for being a part of this and for being part of the goddess issue. So the empathic universe, I mean, I thought we'd start maybe by let's talk about what that means, because of course the word empathy is so much in the air right now, in part because we seem to be lacking it so much in our kind of larger political discourse. So maybe before we get to some of the images, tell us a little bit about what did you mean by that title, and what exactly is the empathic universe?
Yeah, so thank you, Eleanor, for inviting me here, and for the Rail for having me. When Eleanor, you invited me to participate in the goddess issue, I was really thrilled and very excited and somewhat intimidated. So it's I've been following your work and what you've been doing for a long time. So you were a collaborator who you didn't know you were being collaborated with. So it was really wonderful to have you have me participate. And I think, two of the people who also contributed, Rena Banerjee and also Angela Frale, are colleagues and friends of mine. And I think since the beginning of my practice, I didn't really think of what I was doing as what I now call the empathic universe, but I was working on a community building and world building project of collecting people like Angie and like Rena, who think collaboratively, think speculatively, who think also interdisciplinarily, and also think across cultures. And I think that's really what the empathic universe is about, in terms of the values and the stakes of the empathic universe. And I try to actually activate it not only in my artistic practice, but also in the critique groups that I'm a member of. I'm currently a member of two critique groups, one with Wendy Red Star and Paula Wilson, and they're virtual, and another one with Valerie Hegarty and Natalia Nakazawa, Kira Nam Green, and Sarah Jimenez. And in my work and also in my collaborative life as a human being, I try to activate this energy.
Yeah. Well, let's walk through this. We have images here from installations that you've done in the past that are going to be more or less, I guess, recreated at the Museum of Art and Design, and that, sort of show the evolution of this empathic universe. So, yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about this. Is, I guess, where it started, right? What are we looking at here, and what was the first stage of the empathic universe?
So my practice is very much research based, and this installation at the University of Buffalo was a culmination of about 4 years of research. I started it while I was living in Brazil, doing a Fulbright in Brazil, studying folklore performance traditions. And then I came back to the United States and did the Whitney Independent Study Program, in which I started this project and then completed it as an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And I really think that those very specific contexts shaped the parameters of this project, the stakes of the Whitney program, doing this field research in Brazil in a kind of multicultural, multiracial place that has a racial dynamic that's different than the United States, attempting to use a kind of empathetic strategy, a kind of anthropological strategy in doing that research. And then it culminating when I was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum, shaped this work. This is an installation called No Place, and it was, for lack of a better word, crowdsourced ideas, utopian ideas from my community at that time, in 2006 to 2008. And so myself and anthropologist Rachel Lears, who is my collaborator, worked together to ask people in our community what their ideas of utopia were. And we created an ethnographic film and a culture. So the people in No Place are part plant and part human, and change gender and color and transform into the landscape when they die. They also can take our refuse and turn it into usable technology. And so that was kind of the first part of the empathic universe, to build this kind of speculative future utopia.
Right. And one of the things that is true that goes through, of course, is the way in which, these different stages, I guess, of the universe are realized through these remarkable sort of craft-based, figures, installations, etc. Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship to craft and how that feeds into all of this?
Absolutely. I mean, I studied under feminists at Brown University and was very influenced by practices like Woman House, and ended up studying with Faith Wilding at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So feminist craft practices became a very important part of the way that I wanted to make my work from the beginning. And taking something that seems like super ordinary and recognizable and approachable and transforming it into something that is extraordinary, but also still relatable, became a way that I wanted to work. And then after working with the folklore practitioners and learning how to make from them, I basically was an intern helping construct costumes and garments and staging performances. This strategy became a major part of how I work.
And I think it's also it's so engaging, I think, to audiences as well. I mean, just, these are works that you've created this whole sort of cosmology, and we'll talk more about that. But you do it in such a way that's is very accessible. So even though there's a kind of complex kind of, I guess, theoretical grounding to this, just as we can see here, that the way in which they're realized just pull people in. And we were talking just a little bit before. You've also done a number of sort of public things that do that same thing, that address, kind of not the art, kind of art elite. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can go to the next slide, Min. So I also do public art. So I make artwork in public schools. I make artwork as murals on basketball courts. I make artwork for train stations and transit hubs. Right before everyone got online, and we were talking about a mural that I made in Cincinnati while I was doing a solo museum show at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati. And the empathic universe to me extends beyond museum spaces. I love making work in museum spaces and playing with display systems and thinking about history making through thinking with museums. But I also love taking that same energy and putting it in everyday life, so that ordinary people who may have very, very little relationship to art can experience the things that I'm researching and thinking about in everyday space. So the empathic universe is it's my life, it's a museum practice, but it is also a kind of public art practice as well. And I really try to make it accessible. I want my work to be something that my grandma can understand.
Right. That's great.
My grandma didn't go to college, and
Right.
sometimes she'll be like, "Oh, you need to make that better," which I love. She's like, "Oh, you need to work on your craft."
That's great. That's great. Well, it's good to have somebody like that looking over your shoulder. Yeah. So now this is the next stage where this is from an installation, I guess. It's sort of the next stage in the evolution of the universe. And so what are we looking at here?
So the first installation that we saw was this future utopia called No Place. And then this second installation image is from an exhibition I did with Alexandra Schwartz at the Montclair Art Museum. It was my first solo museum show in 2012. And Alexandra and I are working on the Museum of Art and Design show as well. So it's really wonderful to, 13 years later, work together on another major project. The empathics are people in the present who believe that no place is a utopia worth inhabiting. And so at the Montclair Art Museum, they lend their material culture to the Montclair Art Museum and tell the story of how they have chosen to learn to become empathics. So in this storyline, there are dioramas and this is a reconstruction of their institute. They do rituals. They actually enacted performances, reenactments of their rituals in the installation. They also had a planetarium show simultaneously at the Newark Museum called Hybrid Cosmology, where an empathic told the audience about what it's like to become an empathic. So this is kind of the second stage of this project.
Yeah. And I think what you just said is very interesting. An important part of it is that they've chosen to become empathics, that one isn't necessarily born with empathy, which is, I think, I guess, also a kind of larger lesson, for all of us. You want to talk about why that was important to you?
Well, there are many reasons why that was important. One was that the story worlds actually often tracked what I was experiencing in life, right? So I collaborate with a lot of people, and oftentimes people ask, like, how do you choose your collaborators? And it's actually often that I'm not choosing my collaborators are choosing to collaborate with me. So there was this kind of self-selection that was happening to build the space, to build the universe. And I wanted that to be embedded in the world that I was building, the story world I was building. But from a broader perspective, what you say is exactly right. Like, I think empathizing, and I do think that human beings can be naturally empathetic, but especially with something that you may or may not understand, there is an active choice. There's a series of, you have to learn things. So, as a part of the empathic culture, they choose to physically metamorphose. And then there are actions and rituals and collective things that they do in order to reinforce this transformation. And that's part of like being an empathic. It's not just a passive process. It's an active process.
Yeah, it's a whole culture that you're creating, basically. Yeah. Okay, so the next stage, let's get the next slide. Okay, what happens next?
So then the empathics begin to use technology. So the Institute of Empathy was the original title of the empathics. And so it was a nonprofit institute. They then established something called the Chymatech Corporation. Can we go to the next slide? And that Chymatech Corporation has life products. So any ordinary human being, anybody can choose to use the life product system and have basically wipe their identity clean and download an alternative identity. And for me, the Chymatech Corporation was about what happens when nonprofit drives actually get inserted into a corporate environment. And although it appears utopian, it is dystopian in some ways as well, in a sense that there's a kind of flattening, there's a kind of and I think this piece is it's a little difficult to see with this piece because there are actually maybe like 6 or 7 life products that work in tandem with one another, and also a video that actually describes how you use the life product system, that's narrated by someone who you might hear narrating a pharmaceutical ad. He actually was a voiceover actor for security systems and pharmaceutical advertisements, and that was really important as a part of the piece, that there's this affect where, like, you believe him but you don't fully trust his motivations, and what will end up happening if you engage in this seemingly utopian practice.
Right.
And so that's where, kind of money and corporate interests and technology kind of begin to be a nefarious but potentially also utopian force in this world.
Yeah, and this also, I mean, as you were saying before, that often these developments are motivated by kind of things in the real world. And I guess we can all be very aware, especially right now, of sort of the dangers of kind of technology run amok. And so I was curious if what was the real world overlap in terms of inspiring you to move in this direction?
It's a good question. I think there was a real like technotopianism that was happening in 2015. You know, for me, like Instagram was becoming like very prevalent. It was everywhere. There was a kind of utopianism to it, but simultaneously, it just felt like, you know, maybe and eventually, of course, you know, this is where we are now, where it's not, it wasn't so utopian. So maybe let's go to the next slide and I can talk about the next image.
Yeah.
So basically, the next part of this project was called the Kaima Cloud. It was a part of the Kaimatech Corporation. And the Kaima Cloud is a self-replicating digital universe, and there are a series of technologies that the Empathics, the Institute of Empathy, actually creates so that people can access the self-replicating digital universe called the Kaima Cloud. And it's made up of all of the user information of people who have wiped their identities clean and downloaded alternative virtual avatars. And I think they're all of this like tracking of preferences, all of this, you know, cookies, like the kind of hyper acceleration of surveillance through the use of applications that was already beginning to happen in 2015, became a part of the Empathic Universe and the story world. And I guess am a kind of hopeful human being. So I wasn't trying to construct the with the Kaimatech Corporation, I definitely was trying to create a kind of dystopian version of it. But when I shifted into Kaima Cloud, I started thinking hopefully again, like what alternative digital universes can we produce? Like what spaces, using these platforms, like what spaces can become available to people? What world can we build and connect with others in these new digital universes?
Yeah.
So maybe we can go to the next slide.
Yeah. Let's do the next slide. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
And
so
so,
I started building these
Very
kind of
quickly.
fully immersive. Oh, hello.
Sorry, very quickly. I think some of the audience member are having a difficult time hearing you. If you don't mind speaking up or speaking a little closer to the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this better?
Yeah.
Is this better?
Mhm.
And so I started making, so this is called Floating World of the Cloud Quilt, which is very much a part of the Kaima Cloud project. So I started creating these fully immersive video installations using elements from the Kaima Cloud so that people would be immersed in this kind of new alternative self-replicating digital universe that wasn't structured by the logic of, you know, Elon Musk and data tracking. Or like, you know, I wasn't thinking about Elon Musk, but and I don't really, the thing is, like, I don't actually really think with those people. I actually just know that they're there. Because I don't really want to think about, like, I don't want to centralize them too much in the construction of these spaces.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's clear looking at all of this that you're drawing on a lot of different cultural models here. And one of the things I find very interesting about your work is that, you know, there's it's very, you know, you're looking at technology both as you know, a potentially, you know, liberating and also a potentially destructive force. But you don't necessarily see a division, I guess, between technology and nature in the way that we tend to. I mean, the Noplacians who we, you know, started out with, you know, these are these sort of plant-human hybrids. Could you talk about the role of, you've talked about technology, what's the role of nature in the universe?
Can we go to the next slide? So I really, I love this work. It was a piece that I made for the Courier Museum of Art in a solo museum show that I did last year in New Hampshire. And it is a large kind of exploded figure. So it's a giant human form, actually, almost like a goddess silhouette that's fractured into, I think it's about 20 different fragments of glass. And this is all made out of fused glass. And that body has elements of the Kaima cloud projected onto it. So in this still image, it's really hard to see, but it's kind of swirling and moving and kaleidoscopic, and the glass is reflecting and refracting the light in a way where the body becomes almost dematerialized, and also a part of it's almost like a big bang. Like I always like when this piece was at the end of a long corridor, so you really saw this figure as almost like an exploded figure in space. And this is a kind of a cheesy thing to say, but I always love the idea that all matter is stardust. It's like this kind of like our bodies are made of we're like intergalactic travelers, and all matter recreates. We are actually, we die, we become earth, we become rocks, we become water. And so for me, this piece is almost like a perfect example of something I want people to experience and feel. And when you see the installation, it's larger than life. It's really, really big. And this will be on the 5th floor of my show at the Museum of Art and Design. And the experience of seeing the piece is also disorienting. And that disorientation is a part of my practice too, which I really haven't talked about. That disorientation, so that you really have to stand there grounded and look and try and understand what you're experiencing and feeling and seeing, and use your critical faculties, whether it's empathizing or trying to understand, or trying to locate yourself through that dislocation. And I think in a lot of ways, like that's the point of the work that I'm making, is to kind of trigger that in people as they're moving through my installations.
Yeah. Well, and you talked in the Brooklyn Rail interview that we published about kind of moving from, I guess, having the viewer be a spectator to really being immersed, this kind of immersive experience to actually kind of activating them. And I guess that's been a kind of, was that what you were intending to do all along, or is that a thing that sort of evolved as a kind of goal?
Why don't we go to the next slide? So this is the current exhibition at Susan Inglett Gallery. It's called The Woodswoman Method. And, originally the way that I made work was it was almost acting, right? So the performers were actors. And then from the performers being actors, the performers actually started to do kind of restaging of things. And then from restaging of things, it turned into people participating in the installations. And I really think that things became kind of participatory when I first started encountering people posting themselves on social media immersed in my installations, where they'd tell some sort of story about their relationship to the installation and post it on social media. And so that image that they were constructing became something else. Like it kind of shifted. So it was no longer a performance, it was a kind of enactment, a participatory enactment. And around that same time, I started working with dancer and anthropologist Amy Meredith Cox. And she began to activate the installations that I was making with her own research. And she would actually guide other people through a series of actions, like audience members. So there's been this kind of evolution of my work from like total fiction to a hybrid of participation, masquerade, and engagement. And I think the public artwork actually also has shifted me in that direction too, right? Because I'm always thinking about like who's going to be using this space, you know, in like who's the community here? How are they going to encounter this artwork on a regular basis? So I think there's a lot of different ways that I'm engaging with performance. And sometimes I put garments and costumes inside of the installations so that people can actually trust themselves and stage themselves as a part of the world. Um, and all of those different means and methods are very important. And the reason I wanted to bring these slides up is that you know, I make these large scale installations, but I also love pulling out elements from the installations and they become artifacts, right? So it's almost like a decontextualized, I don't know, Buddhist sculpture in someone's home, right? Like you don't necessarily know exactly what that object is unless you learn about it and you study it and you think about it. Like you may not get all of the affect from that particular object, but actually like that object is a part of or a fragment of a whole methodology. And that's why I called this show the Woods Woman Method. Because I think of these objects as coming out of a methodology, this Woods Woman methodology, and being presented here at
Yeah.
Susan.
And the Woods Women, now that tell us about the Woods Women.
So the Woods Woman it's got two different components. There's a kind of fictional component, which I've been working on, and I still haven't totally built out the story world. But there's also this methodological component, which I feel kind of more comfortable talking about. And I think is really easy to see in, for me at least, in the glass pieces. So on this little shelf here in this installation shot, there are 5 pieces of glass. One is actually in the shape of a head, and then 4 are foraged plants from the Bronx, foraged edible and medicinal plants from the Bronx. And, you know, the Woods Woman methodology is an empathic methodology of going into a research site and attempting to understand that location and pull site specifically from that location, particular information, and then collecting it into the artwork. So that when people experience the artwork, it's not decontextualized for them in their community. So the landscape collages that are next to it, those were made for the Newark Museum originally. And they were housed adjacent to Hudson River School paintings. And so there was this whole, you know, I have a whole PowerPoint presentation just about, you know, the meaning of landscape paintings and the production of empire, you know?
Right.
And I think that's what the method is. And I actually think that method applies and has applied to every single artwork I've ever made as a part of the entire Empathic Universe. So I was really happy to be able to use that title for this exhibition at Susan's.
Yeah, you know, and I was curious about, you know, the Hudson River School link to your work, which is, I mean, as you say, it's about sort of, I guess, landscape as colonialism. You know, that in fact, what appear to be, you know, kind of objective, you know, images, you know, are in fact imbued with all these other values. And it's very interesting because you wouldn't, and your work has this kind of very futuristic, you know, kind of quality, wouldn't necessarily link it to the Hudson River School painters. But I thought that was a very interesting, you know, kind of link. And you want to talk a little bit more about what that, you know, what that meant to you?
I mean, so Tricia Loughlin Bloom invited me to do an intervention into the landscape gallery at the Newark Museum of Art just before the pandemic. And so I was an artist in residence there from about 2019 to 2021. And as I was researching the Hudson River School paintings, it became very clear that we think of them as documents, but actually they're speculations on landscape. So it's a kind of composite of a speculation on a landscape and an actual landscape. And that really kind of hit home to me when I saw that George Washington was a landscape collector, a cartographer, and of course, one of the founding fathers of the United States. And the landscapes that he was commissioning and collecting were almost like speculative documents for what the United States would end up looking like. And especially as a cartographer and a speculator, like this guy is a land speculator. So, and so that just kind of blew my mind, right? I was like, oh, like we think they're real because they were made real. And so what are other kinds of speculations that we can construct, and how can we abstract these speculations so that they no longer are as powerful? Like what can we replace them with? So unfortunately, we don't have this image in the slide presentation, but I made a collage for the Newark Museum, which is now in their permanent collection. And at the heart of the collage is a quotation by Sojourner Truth. And the quotation is, "Give her a chance to set it right side up again." And that quotation comes from her "Ain't I a Woman" speech. And she actually never said any of the words in that "Ain't I a Woman" speech. It was actually rewritten by a white suffragette for her to sound like she had a Black Southern accent, because it like made more sense for, people like in the suffrage movement to understand Sojourner Truth that way. But she would have had a Dutch accent and would have grown up in the landscape. She grew up on a farm in upstate New York. And so that became my prompt for making all of these landscapes. So these collages are right side up and upside down and on the side, right? So they actually can be shown in any of those directions. There is no horizon line, actually. Like they can become, infinitely mutable and changeable. And I've installed them in a multitude of ways, including at the Thomas Cole House, which I was really excited about, because Thomas Cole was a Hudson River School painter, and showing these works in that space was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think one of the things that's so interesting about, your work is the way it bounces off of, of history and also kind of futuristic speculation, and of course current events, and so I guess what in building an alternative universe, how do you see that helping us to understand our own universe? I mean, how do you use your alternative universe to help us understand who we are?
That's a really hard question for me to answer. I know you actually sent it to me in advance, and I was like, how do I answer this question? Well, I think maybe I can talk about utopia. I think maybe utopia is the way that I can talk about this. And so when I started the No Place project, so No Place is literally utopos, which is utopia, from the Greek, non-location. And, utopias are collective imaginings of like specific groups with specific stakes at a specific moment in time. And it's through those specific imaginings and, the imagining of my specific community from between 2006 and 2008. Was there these plant humans who change gender and color and transform back into the landscape when they die. And, it's a very, it's not everyone's utopia. It's not everyone's utopia. And I think that building these kind of speculative spaces, these speculative, potentially utopian, actually potentially dystopian for other people spaces, creates the potential of imagining alternatives in relation to how we live. And so that's why I often align myself and think of myself as in the lineage of people like Octavia Butler, or, and like you go back and you read some of her books and there's like Make America Great Again, like it's like she uses those words in her writing. It's kind of fascinating that she was able to kind of key into something in the present that's actually going to happen in the future. And I think that's what is important to me is to build these spaces of imagining for that purpose. Another reason it's important to me is like not Jack Sipes, but Oliver Sacks, a major influence for me when I first started making my work. And one of the things he says is like, you don't really need, you don't need various crazy technologies to imagine alternative worlds. Like our brains are able to enact them. And so I think that's the crux of my work, is this like trying to trigger people to enact alternative possibilities and feel them even for a moment in their brains, but also like constantly reinforcing that it's methodological, right? So it's not just like it happens. You know, constantly reinforcing it's a woodswoman method.
It's a choice. Yeah.
Research. It's a choice. Like you
Yeah.
have to learn about history. Like you have to,
Yeah.
you know, like it's very so it's not just like, oh, like I'm just in my room like imagining things. It's like I'm collecting information from people around me and trying to figure out like what is an alternative. So I think that's all a part of the empathic universe.
Right. Well, when you started, did you have a larger conception that you were going to go in this direction? And I'm curious about whether your notion of utopia has changed, your idea of kind of how universes are built are changed. Going back to the beginning, where did you see this going, and what is, how does this compare to what you were expecting to be doing?
So I can start like way back in fourth grade. I had this incredible fourth grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Harley, and she taught us anthropology, and she had us. She's very concerned about rainforest deforestation at the time, and this was in the 80s. And she would have us enact and perform as like a toucan, or she would have us do these things, and we do them collaboratively and collectively as a classroom, and we'd have to work together. And then we'd make dioramas and also like go into the back of our schoolyard and do archaeological digs, and I feel like, maybe I didn't know that was the seed, but I feel like I've been doing Mrs. Harley's fourth grade class since.
Wow.
And she was really, there was a piece about her in the New York Times in the 2000s. She was one of the very few Black teachers in the Scarsdale school system. And one of the things that was very important to her in that New York Times article is written. She thought a lot about like anti-Semitism as well, and the Holocaust, and we did a lot of sections on that as well. And empathizing and teaching her students to the faculty of that, understanding cultural difference, was crucial to her pedagogy. And I think I'm kind of like just, second generation Mrs. Harley.
Wow. Now, she must have seen your work. Have you kept her apprised of what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we actually, for the Courier Museum of Art, we actually collaborated on educational programs together. So yes, and she's coming to my Museum of Arts and Design show.
Oh, that's great. Little did she know what she was doing. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, and so what other artists, thinkers, whatever, have been like major influences in that way on you, or even individuals, maybe family? And what if you're sort of charting kind of where this all comes from besides Mrs. Harley? What else?
Well, my grandmother, so you mentioned Min mentioned actually that I'm Black, white, and Japanese, and my grandmother, my white grandmother, grew up in Father Divine's ministry, And I didn't really know that growing up, but we learned about it subsequently. And of course, like my grandma's white, my grandfather's African American, and my mother's Japanese, and she's an immigrant. And Father Divine's ministry was a ministry in Harlem, which was kind of like a socialist project of collective living. And it was a multicultural socialist project of collective living. And I think like that also has been a major influence on me, just through family. Like I didn't even know it was happening, right? But that's something that was structuring the way that I grew up and the reality of my family and my life. Um, lots of things have influenced me. I mean, my teacher, Candida Alvarez, has been, and she actually has a really big show coming up at the Museo del Barrio. She was my professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She basically taught me how to create these structures and how to trust my instincts and be an artist. And my husband is an anthropologist. His name's Sean Mitchell. And his books, Constellations of Inequality, what's it called? Democracy. Like he's written about democracy in Brazil, and he's also written about like democracy and counterinsurgency. And I think all of these, very close human beings in my life have deeply impacted the way that I think and that I make. And of course, like there are plenty of books that I've read by people I don't know as well. But, I think I feel very lucky that I'm in a kind of family and community of artists and thinkers who I think are kindred spirits and think in these ways.
And you teach, right? So how do you pass this on? So in a way, then you're the next conduit to pass this on to your students. How do you do that?
I listen to them. I think I listen to them and really try to get at what they're thinking about. And I listen hard and I listen well. And I try not to project what I think they should be doing. And I try to understand who they are and where they're going. So my favorite thing to do is to do graduate and undergraduate advising because I get to really listen hard and see what people are making and how they're thinking and respond to those things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think your students are probably very lucky to have you. So I guess, yeah, it's maybe time to switch over to see if there's the Q&A, see if there are some questions, comments, letters to the editor.
Thank you, Eleanor and Saya. There's a link where you can submit your questions in the chat, so if you please feel free to send us questions. Our first question is from G. Could you reflect a bit on the role and practice of radiance within the empathic universe, that shedding of layers of darkness which has been masking our inner light, and so allowing our authentic soul selves to shine through? Thank you.
So I love the way that the question has been posed. It sounds like less of a question and more of a which I appreciate, interpretation of how the work makes you feel, and I love that it makes you feel that way. I do think that I have humanism is a big part of how I think about my practice. It's a kind of humanistic practice. But it's a humanism that recognizes difference and distinction, again, kind of from anthropology. So I think thank you so much for that question, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Saya. The next question is from me. I wanted to hear a little bit more about your collaboration with the fourth grade teacher you had, the education program, how that aligned with your work practice and how that informed your practice, and also sort of that kind of prolonged collaboration, because I think when we think of collaborating on a project, it's often the duration of the project that we're thinking about. But I feel like your collaboration with this teacher has been, like decades long. And I wonder if that has anything, or that duration and sort of not sort of, or that duration, how that duration has influenced your collaboration with your teacher.
So I never really, I actually love the way you've asked this question too. I've never really thought about the fact that I've been collaborating with Mrs. Harley since I was in fourth grade. But more or less, yes. The collaboration for the Courier Museum was very specific. What we asked her to do, because she's a teacher and a fourth grade teacher, what we asked her to do was come up with a series of projects that students could do either in the galleries or in the what's it called, educational classrooms, that would enhance their relationship to the exhibition. And so she actually created a series of workshop prompts for educators to do. And so it was collaborative in the sense that she was responding to my installation. So it was almost like the opposite, where like I had always responded, like I as a fourth grader was responding to her installation, her classroom. And she constructed prompts for students to enact inside of my installation. And thinking about long-term collaboration like that with Mrs. Harley, yeah, I mean, absolutely. She absolutely has structured the way that I see, the way that I think, the interdisciplinarity with which I move through the world. It was my favorite class ever, probably. And I wish more kids had the opportunity to learn in that way, because we weren't just writing papers. We were really immersing ourselves in this kind of in the world that we live in.
It's just an amazing testament to the importance of education and of good teachers, a thing that is so often devalued, I think, in our culture. What a teacher can do, can change your life. So it's kind of, an amazing testament. So,
Well, and she thinks of her practice that way. I think that's always how she thought of her practice. Her practice was, I don't know if she would use the words a political practice, but in a way it was a political practice of teaching kids how to empathize.
Yeah.
Through her educational pedagogy.
So I think, let's say, so I guess, Chloe, that's the end of the questions, unless anybody else, this is your last chance to have a question. Yep. So, all right. So thank you very much, Saya. It's been great. And I want to encourage everybody first to go see the current show at Susan Inglett as a kind of, that'll get you revved. And then the Museum of Art and Design show is I guess April, what day does it open?
It opens April 12th.
April 12th.
And there's a full color catalog. It's kind of amazing. I'm really excited about it. You can pre-order it on Amazon. It's called the Empathic Universe. And I also want to just plug my friend Paula Wilson's book. It's so beautiful. It more. So I highly recommend her book and her art as well.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, thank you. And I can't wait to see the next iteration. So
thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you. That was such a beautiful note to end the conversation today. Thank you, Beckett and Susan from Susan Inglett Gallery, and Alex and Wendy from Museum of Art and Design for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Larry Clark and Raymond Foy on the occasion of 9295 at Rakoski 68. And as it is a Rail tradition, you can now turn on your mic and say goodbye as you leave.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye,
so much,
Saya.
Saya and Eleanor. That was amazing.
All right. Yeah.
Great
Okay.
discussion. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
thanks
Thank you.
everybody for coming. Yeah.
Looking
Very
forward to it.
fun.
All
And
right.
go see the show.
Yes, absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you so much.